If the Miami Dolphins want more competition along their interior offensive line, but they don't like the free agent options, who are some players that they could call across the league for? I've come up with my own personal short list here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The playoffs have wound down, but the sports don't have to stop sporting the way that you want them to. FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a booster bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today on the show, I've come up with my own personal short list of potential, if I were Chris Grier, and I'm not, but if I were Chris Grier, a couple of teams across the league that I would maybe be placing some phone calls to if I were interested in infusing a little bit more competition to my interior offensive line group, and I didn't really like the free agent options that are out there. Full disclosure, this is not a reporting of players that are available for trade. I'm trying to look at depth charts across the league, gauge the offensive lines and the talent that's available, try to view players that maybe have had their circumstances changed through new players that have been added or coaching staff changes or scheme changes, and say, hey, maybe you're not the best fit here anymore. Hey, maybe the team doesn't have you in their long-term vision anymore and you're in a contract year. Trying to identify and feel out those players that might make sense if you wanted to add somebody else to the group. This is been a fun thing to kind of work through, because one of the things that we have been doing over at Locked On NFL Scouting is the daily team assessments of the full rosters. And what's really compelling for the Dolphins is we have our concerns about the ceiling of the offensive line group, but I think their overall depth is a lot of guys that are going to be on rosters. There's other offensive lines across the league where the eighth guy you feel like isn't a roster caliber player. The Dolphins have a number of quality depth options, and I think are actually probably kind of in a tough numbers game. And that's what makes identifying somebody you would bring in kind of challenging, because you would want to bring somebody in that's not redundant and the same kind of skill or the same ceiling as a player, but instead somebody that might actually give you a better boost. So either you find a player like that that's available for you to go after, or you find low-cost opportunities, be that a late-round future pick swap or something like that, that kind of gets you a roll of the dice on a guy. So that's the compilation of the list that I have, and I have 6 names across 5 teams in the league. Most of them, or all of them are NFC teams. Some of them are not necessarily good players or haven't proven to be good players. But based off their backgrounds, it is compelling, and the cost probably would not be such that I would call and inquire if, in my time in this period where I was talking to Mike McDaniel and talking to Frank Smith and talking to Butch Berry and kind of getting a feel for everybody through minicamp and OTAs, what they felt of the offensive line competition, if you felt like somebody else was needed, these are some of the names that I've been able to identify. So again, this is not necessarily, hey, these guys are definitively available for trade. It's more, what does the intersection look like of their individual profiles with their teams and their trajectories? So I'll start with the first name here being somebody off of the Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, and that's a player in Green Bay that I would call and inquire about. It's a former top 100 pick for the Packers, and that's Sean Ryan. He's a third-year interior offensive lineman who was a college offensive tackle at UCLA. He played 1 snap as a rookie, Went on to take less than 250 snaps in his second year in 2023 as a rotational player. They kind of platooned him at one of the guard spots throughout the course of the season. He has the physicality and the athleticism to be an impactful player in this kind of system, but had to work on transitioning from tackle to guard. And that transition, it took some time. But then you look at the Packers and what they have from an infrastructure standpoint. They used their first round pick on a tackle / guard in Jordan Morgan. Is Jordan Morgan going to win the other guard spot opposite Elgton Jenkins? They had a young player at tackle last year in Rasheed Walker who came in and played admirably well, particularly in the back half of the season, to go with Zach Tom as the other tackle there for Green Bay. And they got Josh Myers at center. So they also used a day 3 pick on another interior offensive lineman. Does he come in and perform well in minicamp? Does Royce Newman give them some peace of mind that if you made an offer that was compelling enough that they'd be willing to move on from Sean Rhyan amidst 2 rookies that were added to that offensive line with a group that has a lot of positional flexibility? I'd at least call and inquire and try to pick the Packers' brains. And the Dolphins, of course, go back to 2020. They have done business with the Packers. They were part of the Jordan Love trade. It was a disaster for Miami because they moved down, picked up an extra day 3 pick and drafted Noah Benogany with that draft choice. But they've successfully done business before. Sean Rhyan, the next 2 seasons is due $1.13 and $1.4 million in base salary is the final 2 years of his rookie contract. That's the kind of player I'd love to take a dice roll on, a guy like that who has talent but had to learn to transition. There's some overlap with the scheme. You take all that and then you take the quote from Adam Stenavich that came after the Packers lost to San Francisco in the playoffs this year, talking specifically about Sean Rhyan. He's still got a ways to go. This is a direct quote from Adam Stenavich, former 49ers offensive line coach, current Packers OC. Still got a ways to go. I like what we've seen from him from a physicality standpoint. He does a good job in the run game at the point of attack, but he still has a ways to go in pass protection. Would be his biggest thing moving forward. If he wants to be a staple guard of this league, you obviously have to excel in this realm. So there's one thing we're going to focus on as we move forward, just to elevate that part of his game. It's a candid quote. But then you take that quote from after the playoffs ended, and you look at, hey, we drafted 2 offensive linemen this year, including one the first round, who's competing for that other starting spot at guard. Make the phone call, right? See what they want. And if you like the cost, if the cost is worth it to you, you can kick the tires and potentially choose to add somebody if you, as the Dolphins, felt like it was necessary. I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying that they do. I would like to see another name added to this mix that has a starter ceiling. I don't know that any of these names, other than probably one, definitively are that. But if you're being realistic, there's a name out there in Greg Van Roten that I will continue to point to as the free agent option that's available that I like for the Dolphins. But they haven't made that move yet. They haven't made any move yet. They've kind of alluded to they like having the guys with more time on task. I've got 5 more names. We're going to get into them next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. Summer can be tough, right? Because the playoffs are over, Stanley Cup Finals. Of course, South Florida's still celebrating the Panthers winning the Cup. The NBA Finals are over. You got baseball. You got some other sports. But the peak playoff push is over. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up their app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost daily. It's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. The next name that I have is a rookie from last year who saw a pretty dramatic shift with his team with a coaching staff change and a front office change, and that's Braden Daniels with the Washington Commanders. He was a versatile player at the University of Utah, was drafted in the 4th round, had 25 starts at tackle between left tackle and right tackle, double digits at both at Utah, and another 18 starts at left guard. So guard, tackle, positional flex, both sides of the line type of utility player. And what stood out to him was the athleticism that he had. He's not the biggest guy, but the athleticism is a staple core of what the Dolphins want to be in every aspect of what they have on their roster. And some of you guys yesterday with the RAS show made a great point, and it's worth acknowledging that RAS is a great tool, but it's most applicable for guys that are recently out of college, because as you age, you don't have to go through the testing process again. So there's a deterioration of that athletic profile. It's a valid point, but as we said yesterday, not all of these talking points are all encompassing and surefire and completely 100% accurate. But I would also say vets for the Dolphins that were RAS guys that had aged and had their stuff decreased. If they were a lower floor athlete when they first came into the league, you would assume their floor would go down as well. So if everybody, the longer you're in the league, your floor for your athletic profile dips a little bit. Still having guys who came in with a higher baseline when they first came into the league is still relevant. But it's neither here nor there. We're talking about Braden Daniels. Fourth round pick by the Commanders. 80th percentile or better amongst interior offensive linemen in the 40-yard dash, the 10-yard split, the vertical jump, the broad jump, the three cone, the short shuttle. Very athletic player. Very much meets the MO of the Dolphins and what they have up front. But Adam Peters and Dan Quinn are now the GM and head coach there in Washington after sweeping changes throughout that organization, so far up that it goes to the ownership group. Washington this offseason paid big money for Nick Allegretti and Tyler Biadasz as interior offensive linemen to come in and start. And then they drafted Brandon Coleman with the 67th overall pick, tackle from TCU, who can also play guard and tackle. And then they have Andrew Wiley as the other tackle. So you just have kind of this numbers game where you read between the lines and say, hey, they presumably acquired 3 starting offensive linemen between the draft and free agency to go with the right side that has Sam Cosmi and Andrew Wiley. And then they also have another rookie from 2023, and Ricky Stromberg, who has guard and center flexibility. You say, well, the numbers game here is not great, right? And Cornelius Lucas is another competent tackle. So that might be a player who may be worth taking a late round pick swap dice roll on because of the athletic profile that you're just not going to find with a street free agent at this point in the game. As again, there's been a lot of sweeping changes in that football operations, and the players that there's been a lot of influx of new guys that presumably this staff and regime want to choose to covet with what they bring to the table. Daniels has 3 years of player control left on his rookie contract, and he's owed $795K, $1.03 million, and $1.145 million over the next 3 seasons. I thought that was another good candidate for a team that maybe necessarily doesn't have a lot of bona fide proven depth, but has made sweeping changes, if you will. The next one's probably the most interesting one because of the path he's taken, because of his experience last year, because he's in a contract year, and the team used a first-round pick on an offensive lineman that's presumably going to take his spot. That's Robert Hainsey with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This was a career right tackle for Notre Dame. He transitioned to center he's taken all the snaps in the NFL to center, but through his first 3 seasons of NFL play, but was a career right tackle and was in the same draft class as Liam Eichenberg. He was drafted in the 3rd round in 2021, graded as an elite zone blocking system player at Notre Dame at right tackle. Some questions about the length, ends up playing at center. Better functional athlete, I think, than Liam Eichenberg is, certainly. But just the parallel that exists there with Liam and Hainsey is a fun one. He was a sufficient true pass set player at right tackle, better at the inside, was a promising young player his first couple seasons, but then this past year set a career high in penalties with 9, playing for Dave Canales, who plays a very downhill and gap oriented scheme. So was not a great scheme fit. And obviously Canales has now left, and more on Dave Canales in just a few minutes. But Hainsey now watched the Bucs go out and draft Graham Barton with their 1st-round draft pick to play center. And there's Cody Mauch. They brought in Ben Bredesen in free agency. Luke Godecki, who's the right tackle, has positional flexibility as well. They also have a quality guard option in Sua Opeta. So if Graham Barton's going to win the starting center job, where does that leave Robert Hainsey to $3.1 million in a contract year? Would you bring him in and potentially have him start or compete to start and put him back in his own system and it makes some sense? Like, I pick up the phone and call Jason Light and find out, like, hey, what's the temperature for Robert Hainsey? Is he in your long-term plans? If he's not in your long-term plans, what's that look like? Hainsey's the one that probably costs the most, but he's also the most proven player. And I don't think there's any question. It's not a coincidence that the style of play that Dave Canales brought this past year did not mesh with Robert Hainsey's strengths as a player. I have 3 more names. Each one of them has some pretty significant questions, but there's 2 on one team that has another connection to the Miami Dolphins. And then we also have a player who plays in a scheme that is also off the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. So 3 more names coming your way. That's next year on the special of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. I guess I'll keep things simple here. I'm calling the Carolina Panthers, and I'm trying to figure out because this was the team that spent like crazy on the offensive line. And their current center situation is really interesting. And it potentially has another college tackle who was an elite zone player, now potentially looking at playing center for Dave Canales in a gap-oriented scheme after this team signed Damian Lewis for $53 million across 4 seasons and signed Robert Hunt for $100 million across 5 seasons to be their new guards. There's certainly a vision for the kind of offensive line the Panthers want to have. And I don't know that Brady Christensen, also from that 2021 draft class, also entering into a contract year, fits the mold. He was a career left tackle at BYU, an elite zone blocker, had questions about his length, and is moving to compete with Austin Corbett as the starting center this year. Christensen played in the week 1 game, had a torn biceps, missed the rest of the season. His rookie season was kind of Liam Eichenberg-ish, where he played on the left side, he played on the right side, he played guard, he played tackle. Not really a player that had a definitive plan. And now they're changing his position again after he took over 1,000 snaps over the last 2 seasons at left guard. And that included missing 16 games last year. Here's the quote from Dan Morgan, who's a former player who's a part of their football operations group there in Carolina. And it talks about both Austin Corbett and Brady Christensen as the players competing for the starting center job. I think Corbett is progressing well. I think Dave Canales would say the same thing. I think him along with Brady Christensen, he's been getting some snaps at center. We feel like he has a lot of potential there as well. We feel good about the position, but we're always looking to challenge our roster and get better and create that competition. We're not going to leave anything. We're not going to close the door on bringing somebody else in as well. Wow, what a ringing endorsement. The second name mentioned behind Austin Corbett, player coming off of a 16-game injury last year in a contract year, due $2.8 million in cash, and the team just threw money at guards. He's played guard, zone blocker, not going to fit the Canales scheme unless he hits at center, but he's behind Austin Corbett in that competition. I'd make a phone call. See what kind of appetite there is. If the Dolphins feel they want to add another name with some meaningful starting experience as a potential scheme fit to their competition. I'd also acknowledge from Carolina, Cade Mays was a former 5-star recruit coming out of high school, drafted in the 6th round, never really took the next step once he got to the University of Tennessee. He has 2 players of player control left on his rookie contract, $985K and $1.1 million over the next 2 seasons. He's taken over 100 snaps at both left guard and right guard. He's been a sufficient level blocker, and I think he brings some really good power at the point of attack. But pass protection is the big question there. That's a player that I can't imagine would have a big price, but I can't imagine you'd feel good about it giving you a definitive solution. And I think that same thing's applicable to the last name that I have that I call about. I'd be picking up the phone calling Les Snead and the LA Rams with Sean McVay. Obviously, they've kind of had their own evolution of their offensive scheme. They have really trended towards power players on the offensive interior. They last season acquired and then gave a new contract to Kevin Dotson from the Pittsburgh Steelers. They signed Jonah Jackson to a big-time contract in free agency this offseason. And last year on day 2, they drafted Steve Avila, who was a guard who's now presumably going to be the starting center. So they have like a very definitive, heavy investment in their starting 3 on the interior. Logan Bruss is a former third-round pick. He was the 104th overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft. But did not play in any games in 2022 and was cut ahead of 2023 before playing on the practice squad for the Rams last year. He has not logged any NFL tenure. He's got 3 years of player control due to that lack of tenure. But at Wisconsin, before being a third-round pick, was somebody who took starts at both right tackle and right guard. The Rams have tried him at right tackle and right guard. I think he's certainly better at guard. He's a good athlete, but just kind of based on the Rams and their offensive tackle situation and those heavy investments on the interior, he's probably at best going to be interior or offensive lineman 8 on their depth chart. That's like a 2025, 2026 7th round pick would kind of be like, hey, I'll give you a bag of chips for a roll of the dice for Logan Bruss. Because again, he didn't make the team last year, but we're not too far away from a player who was an impactful player at Wisconsin and has some positional flex. And we know the Dolphins like that, who's played in a scheme that has some level of carryover, that it might be worth kicking the tires on. But like Cade Mays and Logan Bruss, you don't have a lot of confidence in them being anything more than cheap dice rolls for you. I think Robert Hainsey's probably your most direct path to somebody who could feasibly start for you. I think Brady Christensen is an attractive stylistic fit, but there's an injury history there as well, and that's one of the bigger economic investments that you could have going into a 4th year for him as a player. So are you head over heels with this collection of potential names to call and ask about? No, not necessarily, but that's the nature of the beast. There's only so many offensive linemen to go around. And I would say there's teams that probably look at the Dolphins and are hoping that they cut a guy that team can then go claim off waivers, and that would probably be their 6th or 7th offensive lineman. I'm not sure any of these guys crack your starting 5, but that's kind of where you're at right now. I think that player, if you wanted it, is still in free agency in Greg Van Roten, but they need to make that decision that they want to do that. And if they don't, here's at least some other names across the league for teams that have situations that might afford you a good stylistic fit that maybe if you're pressed to play him down the stretch or in a spurt throughout the season, they can keep their head above water, which I think is something that maybe the Dolphins struggled with last year based off of a couple of the guys that played and just weren't at their core weren't good stylistic and athletic fits for the Dolphins, in addition to, hey, you're not the starting guy. That's going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed. We have some more great content coming your way this week. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Make it a great rest of your day. Go Dolphins. I'm out of here.